We always talk about NBA super teams and how they're constructed to dominate. The same goes for college basketball. But unlike the NBA, obviously there's no trades and there's no free agency. So it all starts with recruiting, which by the way is perfectly depicted in the '94 classic Blue Chips. Well, minus all the bribery. Shaq, Penny, and Ricky Rowe all recruited to play together? It's simply not fair. Anyway, if you haven't seen that movie, you're doing yourself a disservice. Please go watch. So that movie was fiction, but in reality, we've seen some wild college super teams over the years. Anything short of a national championship is usually considered a failure for these teams, and it happens more often than not. So without further ado, here are my top 5 super team flops in college basketball history.
Clock at 5, score 4 goals, 3, a 2 home run and 1.
Kicking us off at number 5, I got the 2008 UCLA Bruins. So take this in, this team featured Russell Westbrook, Kevin Love, and Darren Collison. The Bruins were coming off back-to-back Final Four appearances, but couldn't get over the hump in that span. And the last time they won a national title was in '95. So clearly, this prestigious basketball program was overdue, right? In '08, you got Russell Westbrook as a sophomore, the most entertaining player to wear the blue and gold since Baron Davis. Freshman Kevin Love was going viral for hitting full-court shots before the games. K. Love was a walking double-double and Pac-10 Player of the Year. Brody won Pac-10 Defensive Player of the Year. Oh, and Darren Collison was no scrub as the second leading scorer on the team. Anyway, long story short, this team was unstoppable during that season, losing just 3 games. Then it came the tournament time, and the Bruins, they won their first game by 41 points. The next game, they won by just 2 points. The next round, won by 10 points, and then won by 19 in the Elite Eight. They looked like they had a legit shot at winning it all. There was one problem that actually 2 problems that stood in their way. One guy named Derrick Rose and another guy named Chris Douglas Roberts. The 2 combined for 53 points and the Bruins lost by 15 to Memphis. And just like that, UCLA's magical run was over. At the number 4 spot, I'm rolling with the 2010 Kentucky Wildcats. You knew Kentucky was going to be on this list. You knew it. And they might be on it another time. So this 2009-10 Kentucky team would feature 8 future NBA players. But the biggest names on that roster, 3 guys, DeMarcus Cousins, Eric Bledsoe, and John Wall. Wall had become a fan favorite at Rupp Arena. He took home SEC Player of the Year, averaging just under 17 points and 7 dimes per game. Cousins was a man amongst boys. He was putting up 15 and 10 per night. And Bledsoe was a spark plug. And let's not forget about Patrick Patterson, who could flat out play. This team was as stacked on paper as any that year, losing only 2 games the entire regular season. It was pretty obvious that Wall and Cousins were one and done, so this was the year to do it. Plus, they hadn't won a title since 1998. So they won their first game of the tourney by 29 points, the second by 30 points, the third by 17 points, and then in the Final Four versus West Virginia, a guy named Joe Mazzulla dropped a then career-high 17 points as Kentucky finally lost. We're at the midway point with the 1983 Houston Cougars at the number 3 spot. So this was before one and done was a thing. And this team featured 2 of the greatest NBA players of all time in Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler. And since this team was so deadly, so entertaining, so living above the rim, they were nicknamed Phi Slamma Jamma. The Cougars reached the Final Four the year prior, but lost to UNC and some guy named Michael Jordan. So '83 was the year, right? Fun fact, the team's leading scorer in 1983 was a guy named Michael Young. When you got a team with Hakeem and Clyde Drexler on it, and they're the number 2 and 3 leading scorers on the team, then you know you got a deep roster. After going 4-2 in their first 6 games of the season, the Cougars went on a 26-game winning streak and reached the finals. 26-game winning streak, let me repeat it. And even though most of you out there weren't alive to see it, you know the outcome. One of the craziest upsets, not only in college basketball history, but in sports history. Lorenzo Charles dunks home the airball as time expires as NC State knocks off Houston and shocks the world.
Wittenberg, oh, it's a long ways. They won it!
In at the number 2 spot, I'm choosing the 2015 Kentucky Wildcats. So we mentioned before how Kentucky couldn't reach the top in 2010. Well, they won it all in 2012 with a guy named AD. But they found themselves back in a similar situation in 2014-15 with a stacked roster. This team would go on to feature 9 future NBA players. Now, most of them didn't amount to anything in the NBA, but still, it's a stacked squad. Oh, and by the way, if you could name all 9 players, then you're a diehard fan. Spoiler alert, Alex Poythress, Tyler Ulis, Dakari Johnson, Trey Lyles, the Harrison brothers, Willie Cauley-Stein, and yes, of course, freshman sensations Devin Booker and Karl Anthony Towns. So fun fact, the last team to go completely undefeated in a season and win the national championship is Indiana in 1976. Well, 39 years later, Kentucky had a chance to do the same. This team steamrolled the competition and entered the tournament undefeated. Of course, they continued their historical run up until the championship game where two guys named Frank Kaminsky and Sam Decker ruined everything. Wisconsin not only shocked the world, but quite possibly the most stacked team in college basketball history, arguably. And my number one pick for college super team flops is the 93 Michigan Wolverines. So at the time, the Fab Five, they were the coolest thing to ever happen to the game of basketball. They burst onto the scene the year before and reached the finals, becoming the first team in NCAA history to start 5 freshmen in the title game. Only problem was that year they had run into a stronger Duke team and lost by 20 to a guy named Christian Laettner. But they had put the world on notice and there was no doubt they'd be back in the finals a year later. And sure enough, they were. This time against a team out of Chapel Hill, UNC. And I think unfortunately we all know what happened in that game. But for anyone who doesn't know, Michigan was down by 2 with seconds remaining. UNC missed a free throw to go up 3. Chris Webber got away with a travel off a missed free throw, then called a timeout when Michigan didn't have any, which resulted in a technical foul. That blunder cost Michigan the game, and the season was over just like that. Okay, so don't get on me for this, but I left out UNLV Running Rebels. Now, I know that they were an insane team in the early 90s, and they were stacked: Larry Johnson, Greg Anthony, Stacey Augmon, and more. But we had to come up with 5, and it was really tough to leave them off. So they're my honorable mention. With that being said, please do me a favor and let me know in the comments which team I forgot. You're going to say UNLV, maybe Vince Carter and Antoine Jameson on that UNC team in the late 90s. I don't know, I'm not going to give them all away, but let me know what you think. Anyway, my name is Brad Parker, and that's my top 5.